Our story begins in the planning office, and someone is surprised that the manager has finally decided to tie the knot. And here is our manager named Kim Bum-jun. He is 35 years old, and he gathers everyone for dinner, at his expense, of course. While some dude with black hair was reading a wedding card in the background, another worker asked what he would treat them with. Of course it would be meat. Meanwhile, he carefully examined the invitation and had a strange feeling of nostalgia. The boy remembered how 14 years ago, he already received something like this. The actions are transferred to the moment when his mother was still working as a teacher in a kindergarten. Usually he spent time with the children and played games with them in order to at least somehow help his mother, when suddenly she called him to her place. One of the girls got lost and her mother asked him to look after her until her parents returned. And the boy just approached the girl and wanted to know her name, but at first she was not very talkative. This was his first meeting with this girl after all. She says that her name is Imbona. In such cases, the boy simply smiles sweetly at her and offers to play with toys until her mother returns. But Bona simply crossed her arms and refused to play because it all seemed childish to her. She simply sat down on a chair like the real boss of this rocking chair and decided that now the guy was her personal servant. So she asked him to bring her something to eat. At that moment, the boy simply thought that the girl was very unusual and could not understand since when he signed up to be her personal waiter. Mother called her and she told her that she had already talked with the driver, branded things, an expensive phone, and very arrogant behavior. It was immediately clear that this girl was from a very rich family. The boy still fulfilled her request and brought her the food she asked for. Mommy simply wished her bon appetit, and the girl sat in shock at the sight of such delicious food. As soon as she tried it, she immediately began to eat food at the speed of flash, and the boy asked her not to rush. It turns out that she used to go to a private kindergarten and was simply shocked when she tried her mother's food. As a result, she moved to their kindergarten and said that this food is much tastier than what the chefs cook at the hotel. The time he spent with the girl increased, and now he began to take care of her. And of course, over time, they became close friends. But one winter, something happened that he could not expect. She named him Enho Appa called me over. She had some kind of gift for the boy, and it turns out to be a note that she handed over but felt awkward. And it turns out that it was an invitation to a wedding, at which the boy was the groom and Bona became the bride. After which she made a very serious expression on her face and proposed that they get married. But in response, our boy smiled a little and left the girl in shock. He just said that first they had to grow up and then they could get married. It turns out that they grew apart after the girl started going to high school, and even now the main character sometimes remembers her. Suddenly a guy in a suit appears behind him and asks if the manager might be dating someone right now. The boy simply said that now he is taking care of himself, but he was given advice so that he should not waste his beautiful appearance. The girl in the background was carefully watching the conversation. Her name was Han Nayeon. She is 25 years old, and it seems that she is secretly in love with the main character. And this is Kang Seung-jae, who constantly makes fun of the boy, and this time he gave out a theory that in fact the main character does not like girls. Before leaving, the boy once again congratulated his colleague on his marriage. Now he had to go to a meeting and then go home. On the way home, the boy was thinking about starting to date someone, but at the same time he perfectly understood that he would not be able to take care of anyone, because he somehow had enough money for himself. Suddenly his mother decided to call him, wondering what she needed. It turns out that his father was in a very difficult situation in the hospital, and the main character kept sending money so that he could have an operation. But his mother did not want him to try so hard for them. But the boy asked her not to say such terrible words because her father did not get into that terrible accident of his own free will. In such cases, my mother simply thanked him and asked if he had already had dinner. In response, he asked her not to worry about him. After which he simply hangs up and begins to think about the fact that life is a very difficult thing. Suddenly he received another call, but the boy could not find out the number who called him, maybe some client. Still, he decides to pick up the phone and calls his name, Lee Young-ho, and in response he hears Appa. The boy was simply in shock after hearing this, unfamiliar but at the same time such a familiar voice. When suddenly on the phone he was asked in a whisper to turn around. And yes, there turns out to be that lady who asks if the main character remembers her. She just happily says this to Bona, the same Imbona from kindergarten. Of course, his shock simply knew no bounds because they had not seen each other for so long. Seen her for a long time. But somehow he was able to recognize her. He had not heard her voice for a long time, but the sharpness in her tone remained the same. After which the girl was so happy to see him that she immediately hugged him. And this is how he met the little girl whom he had not seen for so many years. They decided to go to some place and asked each other about life. It seemed to him that this place was simply amazing but looked too expensive. It turns out that the girl never forgot him and always thought about him, but he only thought about his financial situation. The waiter brought them their dishes, and he understood perfectly well that he could not afford the girl to pay for all this. She simply started eating, but the main character joked that her table manners had not changed at all. He somehow didn't care about the money anymore. The most important thing was that she ate well and continued to grow. But she somehow didn't like that the guy joked about her like that, because she had already grown beyond that age, and in general, she was already 20 years old. In response, the main character laughed even more and said that 20 years is still a child. While the boy also decided to start eating, the girl sat offended and could not understand why he still perceived her as a child. The main character cannot even imagine how long she waited to grow up, when suddenly he comes across something solid in his food. I don't know if it was a stone falling off the ring or a piece of the main character's tooth, but in short, they proposed to him. Just like in childhood, the boy received a proposal to get married, but once again, he didn't understand the joke. But it turns out that she had not forgotten her promise from childhood to get married and showed up only to marry him. The girl was going to return the same wedding invitation that he rejected and give it again to the main character. But she really did keep that childhood invitation to the wedding, but it seems now everything was serious. Of course, he immediately gets scared because he had no intention of marrying anyone and expects that she was just joking. Bona asked him not to worry about this because she would organize everything herself, but he could not accept such responsibility because she was only 20 years old and their age difference was 12 years. But these words only angered her, and the girl could not believe that he still treated her like a child. In such cases, she decides to prove him wrong in a rather strange way, but let's skip this moment. And our main character was simply in shock and could not understand what the hell Bona was doing. He thought that the girl was acting too strangely, but she wasn't going to leave everything just like that. She had to prove to this idiot that she was already an adult. And so the action moves to the hotel in room 403, in which the main character seems to be going to play cards. Young-ho just sat there in fear and couldn't understand what the hell was going on. But the girl told him that he couldn't even imagine how long she had been waiting for the opportunity to play cards with him. It turns out that all these years she tried to grow up and become a real woman, and now she simply could not believe that he considered her a child. All she wanted was to look like an adult woman in his eyes and not a small child. It turns out that she is still a real boss of the gym because she worked out in the gym for many days to pump up and drink strawberry milk. Perhaps the main character believes that she simply does not know how to play cards, but nothing could be fixed. But it turns out that all this time she wanted him to become her first opponent. All this time she watched many training videos and different bloggers just to become the best opponent in his life. In such cases, she simply makes a very serious expression on her face and asks the main character to truly trust her at least once. Everything was very strange. She talked so much about how she studied playing cards, but in fact her game was too ridiculous, or she only played so strangely with him. The boy now only had to watch the game and think about how to get out of this situation. The main character just thought that he needed to gather his strength because he had to play cards with a young girl. He was going to ask Bona to calm down and come to her senses, but she just took his hand and asked him not to disturb her. And the main character was simply shocked that his childhood friend was so serious. It was because of such seriousness that his heart began to beat faster. It was so unusual for him to realize that the girl had grown up so quickly. She had had character since childhood, but now she had become completely different. Realizing that the situation has already gone too far, the main character simply takes her hand and says that he will not play cards with her. No means no. After which her face was full of disappointment, and she began to ask for forgiveness from her appa. The main character takes a dramatic pause and then declares that he is going to leave. Of course, after her feelings were rejected, Bona begins to cry. After which, in the taxi, it seemed to the driver that the young miss was defeated. She does not deny this because her appa is not an ordinary person at all. It seemed to the driver that she was crying because her eyes were like those of a rabbit, but she only said that she cried a little. But still, she liked this meeting because she hadn't seen the guy for so long. Now that he has become so cool, she wants to marry him even more. After the girl declares that she is not going to give up, the actions are transferred the next day to the office where the boy worked. Suddenly, that blonde appears in front of him and brings coffee, asking why the main character is so absent-minded today, because it's completely unlike him. But in response, the guy simply said thank you for bringing him coffee. The lady simply reminded him that today, the head would have a dinner to which he invited everyone. Thinking about his marriage, the girl was terribly happy, and at the same time envied his happiness. And he simply could not understand the reason why she did not meet anyone, because crowds of fans should line up in front of such a beautiful girl as her. Suddenly, she decides to tell him that she actually has a boyfriend whom she has liked for a long time. The main character was simply shocked by such a statement and wanted to quickly find out who this lucky guy was. but the girl's brain was already boiling from tension. While she was trying to come to her senses, the boy called the main character to his place. It was about the changes he recommended him to make, and according to Young-ho, everything was very cool. Evening had already come, and now the whole office was discussing the place to which they would go. While they were walking, one of the workers asked who the man was in the wedding photo. It turns out that the head just used Photoshop, which worked wonders. Suddenly, someone called the main character, and everyone was simply shocked at the sight of this. It was the same friend of Bona who arrived in a very expensive Porsche. All the employees were shocked by the cost of this car. Everyone was trying to understand who this woman was and how she was connected with the main character, but in the meantime, she found out his work schedule and specifically waited here. Behind everyone's back, everyone started whispering that they always thought that Young-ho wasn't dating anyone, but that turned out to be a lie. Where did he manage to find such a beauty in an expensive car? Bona was going to invite him to dinner, but he already had plans, and the blonde now realized that she simply didn't have a chance. Having learned that they would have a corporate dinner, the girl began to rejoice and asked to take her with them. Everyone immediately agreed without even asking the main character. While she was already standing happy because she would spend time with him, the boy turned to his last hope and asked if the boss would be against it. After the action, they are transferred to a restaurant where the girl found out about the boss's wedding and asked to come there with Young-ho. It seems the main character decides absolutely nothing in his life. Of course, the boss is only for this idea. To begin with, the head asked her to tell her name, and of course she tries to please everyone and says that her name is Imbona. And suddenly everyone understands that she is the youngest daughter of the head of the company, Woo-so, and her interview was done many times in various magazines. While she was trying to improve relations with everyone, the main character sat simply in shock, because all this time he thought that she was just from a rich family. But it turns out that she was the daughter of a very big shot. In such cases, our boy's friends decide to find out under what circumstances they managed to meet. But she suddenly grabs his arm and says that he has always been her first love. Bona simply says that she has been in love with him for 13 years and is trying in every possible way to gain his attention. Of course, everyone was simply shocked by such a story and could not believe that she had been in love with him for 13 years. Still, he tries to clarify a little and says that their relationship is not like that, but everyone has already begun to envy him. And it also turns out that all this time the blonde was looking at her terribly angrily because she had a rival. After dinner, everyone thanked the head for such a delicious dinner, but it turns out that Bona drank too many drinks and the main character volunteered to walk her home. But suddenly the blonde proposed her candidacy because they were both girls, but we all know the real reason. Everyone just started laughing at her and asked her to use her head a little because she could see what was happening perfectly well. The main character also decided that Nayeon was too tired and it would be better for her to go home to rest. After which they said that they had to go and tried to quickly take the blonde away from them, jokingly wishing the main character a happy weekend. Of course, the blonde didn't like this turn of events at all, because she understood that he wasn't just walking the lady home. After everyone had left, the main character was now trying to understand what he should do with this lady, because he didn't even know her address. He just couldn't believe that the girl managed to fall asleep after drinking just one drink. Now he's completely sure that she's a child. The main character thought it would be a great idea to take her to a hotel, but he definitely couldn't afford such luxury. Perhaps it would be much better if he just brought her to his home. And this lady, it turns out, had not slept all this time and heard everything he said. She was very glad that she could go to the house of her beloved. All the same, the plan was just perfect and the girl was simply shocked that she managed to drink so many drinks. But the happiness did not last long, because as soon as they entered home, she immediately fell asleep. The boy thinks that he still needed to go to the bathroom, but still, now it would be strange. In this case, he decides to go there on his own and let the lady sleep here for now. Of course, she didn't sleep all this time and decided that it would be just great to go with him, but the main character is now very scared. Her next attempt to play cards with him began again, and this time it was too strange. Of course, he was simply shocked by this turn of events, but he also did not know what to do in such a situation. Now she had drunk too many drinks, so it was useless to argue with her, but he simply could not indulge her childishness. There was nothing left to do. He would have to fulfill her request. The boy simply helps her with such a difficult task, and the girl says thank you to her appa. Since she has already woken up, the main character begins to think about her returning to her home as soon as possible. The girl, it turns out, noticed his strange behavior, but he still suggested calling a taxi as soon as possible. And she behaved even more strangely than usual, because she thought it was incredibly cute that he was worried about her. Suddenly, she runs up to him from behind and says that she doesn't want to leave, but wants to stay with her appa and play cards. It seems that she has been waiting for this moment for too long to just go home now. But the main character is also not stupid, so he leaves the girl to sleep on the bed and now he himself sleeps on the floor. Now her plan was completely ruined because she deliberately drank only one glass to play cards at night. But if he now just goes to sleep on the floor, then her plan will never come true. The lady couldn't believe that Appa just went and fell asleep on the floor. Did he really have absolutely no love feelings for her? After she was offended by him for a while, she still decides to also move to the floor. And next time she definitely won't let him fall asleep so easily. For now, let him rest. While our Young-ho was simply sleeping peacefully, the girl was already sitting and coming up with a plan, because soon the main character would have serious problems with sleep because of her. Still, until the very end she believed in what he liked, and now morning had already come. Of course, as soon as he woke up he was immediately in shock because he couldn't understand why the hell the girl was sleeping on the floor. Suddenly he remembers her words about the fact that she wants him to understand that she has already grown up. But why the hell did he remember this right now? The main character understands perfectly well that he doesn't need to behave like that, when suddenly the girl grabbed his hand and couldn't believe that he had been planning to play cards with her since the very morning. Suddenly she still gives permission to pick up the deck, but only because it was the main character. She was just wondering what it would be like to pick up a deck, but the boy had absolutely no words, just panic. After which he simply starts to leave, saying that he was just going to take the blanket but doesn't want to play cards. Of course, after these words, Bona begins to get even more angry than before because her next plan was defeated. She simply makes the most serious face possible and says that he is a liar because in fact he really wanted to play cards. After which she simply hugs him and says that she will never let him go. It seems that for the main character this was all too strange. All this was because she really liked him, and now she had arranged a real confession. But the main character didn't know what to answer, so he asked her to get ready to go home since she had already woken up. Her parents will be very worried, so it's better to go home as soon as possible. But this made her even more offended than before, because the main character still considered her a child. When suddenly she decided to throw a tantrum, screaming that she was not going home but was going to go on a date with Young-ho. Suddenly something happens that no one could expect. A huge cockroach appears in the middle of the room. Despite the fact that he was quite nice, the girl starts screaming as if some kind of monster had appeared. Of course, she immediately finds herself a human shield in the form of the main character and shouts that she simply hates insects. When suddenly the boy simply steps on him and takes the life of such a cute creature, from which the girl was simply shocked. After which he arranges an appeal to Bona, because right now she should have felt the difference that was between them. Suddenly he talks about how several cockroaches appear in this apartment every week, and if she is surprised every time, then he simply will not be able to live with her. After which he takes a dramatic pause and asks her to just go home. Suddenly he heard the word cool behind him and could not understand why she said it. But the girl was simply delighted with his behavior. It seemed to her as if the guy was incredibly cool. As if the prince who protected the princess was incredible, Bona came to hug him again. Suddenly she again asked him to marry her. Let them go to the registry office right now. If he refused to go to the registry office, then let him at least go on a date with her. But the boy did not understand at all what the hell was happening with this lady. In the next frame, they were already walking down the street, and she hugged the main character. How did this even happen? The boy believed that this damn child was simply manipulating him. Well, since they have already left, he decides to ask where she wants to go with him. There turns out to be a strange place, and the main character is surprised that she even knows about its existence, unless it is a popular place among young people. And it turns out she had already prepared some kind of surprise, and now stood and smiled because a message came on her phone that everything had already been prepared. The lady only asked Appa to pass, but to his surprise there were absolutely no people there. Was it really because it was daytime? She took responsibility for choosing the film and let him take up space for now. Young-ho had only been here once when he was studying at the university with his friend, but he still couldn't believe that such places could exist. While the boy was sitting in the room and the girl was smiling evilly outside, he was only thinking that this place looked too creepy, and it would be better to go to a regular movie. As soon as the girl entered the room, he was going to warn her not to come up with strange plans, but he says that she just wanted to watch a movie that she had heard about for a long time. It was just beginning and the guys sat down to start watching. When suddenly the title of the movie appears on the screen, the Appa who always wanted to play cards with his little childhood friend. Now the main character was simply shocked. He couldn't understand what this strange title was. Was it really a special film just for them? Suddenly guys playing cards actually appeared on the screen. They too had been friends since childhood. The main character simply sat in shock and did not understand why she chose this particular film. The boy already understood perfectly well that the girl had her own cunning plan, but she sat and watched the film with interest. But he himself understood perfectly well that she was just sitting and pretending to be calm. After all, he saw perfectly well how worried she was while watching the film, but nothing. But now things were bad because if he began to understand this atmosphere, he would definitely play cards with this lady. Suddenly, she realizes that the boy is not going to start the game, and in this case, she decides to take the first step and takes out the deck. It was terribly difficult for him to think about all this, because he could not just sit down and play cards with the daughter of the head of the company. He tried to explain to the girl that her chances of starting to date him did not exceed 1%. But it seems that she was not going to give up so easily. The lady tells him that she tried very hard, but Appa didn't give her even a single chance. Now the main character tried to convince himself that this was just a terrible idea because he couldn't play cards with the daughter of such an influential man. The girl's face. She was worried that he would soon make a terrible mistake, but he did not want to regret it in the future. But he was terribly infuriated by the fact that now he could not say a word what the hell was happening to him now. It seems that she finally succeeded, and our main character finally realized that his childhood friend had become a completely adult. But he still tried to convince himself of this, because he simply could not like a girl who was so many years younger than him, especially his childhood friend. And since she was younger than him, he simply could not say no to her because she might be offended. And yet he finds the only correct option and still agrees with its conditions: let the card game take place. Despite his heart, he just couldn't tell her no while playing cards because she had worked so hard to create this date, so today he would make an exception. It turns out that he was worried all the time that she might just start crying, in which case playing cards for him was like gratitude for her attention. After which the actions are transferred earlier when the girl was very little and cried that her toy was broken. And he tried to calm her down by saying that he would definitely buy her a new one, if only she wouldn't cry. The girl didn't want to believe his words, but he reassured her and said that her new toy would be much better than the last one. Of course, she immediately became happy, and that's all the main character needed because Bona's happy face was much better. Immediately afterwards, she hugged her Appa saying that he is the best, and now he could not make her face as happy as before. Since he couldn't make her happy, but he wasn't going to make her cry either, so it was better to just do what she wanted. So just this time he would make an exception just to make her a little happier, and now she thought that meant yes. She didn't show all the joy, but in fact, in her heart she was as happy as a little child, because now she can do whatever she wants. The situation is terribly strange because she thought that the main character would refuse to play cards, but his heart was ready to jump out at any moment from tension. She didn't want to miss such a chance, so she decided to beat the main character at any cost, and then he would definitely be able to fall in love with her. But it seems that the main character did not at all expect such a sharp turn of events. After she took out a deck of cards, he decided to ask what the hell she was doing, because he had no intention of playing cards with her yet. But she just made a very sweet face and said that now the boy simply wouldn't risk refusing her to play cards. The girl only asked him to sit quietly, and she would begin to deal the cards one by one. The girl was sure that now the main character would be glad to play cards with her, but judging by his facial expression, he somehow didn't really like what he was going to play. If he doesn't like it, then she suggests changing the rules of the game a little so that they both find it interesting to play, and now they have already played poker. But now everything was much stranger than before, because she herself had never played cards, but it seemed to her that it was very simple. But still, she promised herself that she could give it her all precisely so that the boy would fall in love with her. Meanwhile, he sat and could not understand what the hell was happening. The game was too serious, and the lady made such poker combinations that he didn't even know about. Difficult to concentrate on the game, but he still did not lose hope of winning. The main character understood perfectly well that if he stopped the game right now, then he would simply have huge problems. But realizing that he would not be able to continue the game, the boy asked to take a short break. Suddenly something strange happens because now the guy made a very cool move that made her lose a lot of money. And now she even made fun of him that all this time, the main character was deliberately giving in to her so that she would not feel pathetic. But there was no need to do that anymore. Suddenly, the main character realizes that he simply cannot restrain his real strength any longer, and makes a powerful combination that hits the girl. She is simply shocked and does not understand how this could even happen, and now the game begins completely differently, because now the main character will not hold back. So far, she was simply sitting in shock because she had lost control of the situation, and the boy, on the contrary, carried out various attacks without interruption. But she just looked at what was happening, and finally realized that her dream had come true because right now she was playing her favorite poker with him. It really was simply impossible to believe because she had been creating this plan for many years, and now the time had come for her to play poker with him. And yet it had to be stopped. because everything did not go according to her plan, but the main character did not understand what was happening, because she herself asked him to play poker. After which she asks him to play even better than before, and that's where our video ends. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and like so that the new part comes out as soon as possible.